then there's no kind of, let's go.
It's all right. Keep it real. It's all right.
Okay, good morning then, everybody.
Good morning,
See
Keith.
you, chaps. Yeah, good, good. So this is the second, spotlight. We're calling it a spotlight podcast. Yeah, for the patrons. So, and we're gonna have a chat about affordances. Is that right, gents?
Yep,
Yeah,
agree with
pack
that.
that bit.
Yeah, very important concept in our work. So it'd be good to discuss, different ideas, maybe from a philosophical perspective, from a psychologist perspective, and of course from a practical application perspective as well.
Yeah. And I know one paper, it's not going to be the main focus of the chat, but we are going to have a chat about a paper by Eric Rietveld and Julian Kiverstein, A Rich Landscape of Affordances. So the point you made there about a philosophical angle, Keith, that really is a philosophical angle that people might find useful and think about how that might influence or get them thinking about what's going on in their coaching settings. So
Absolutely.
Where would be a good place to start, do you reckon?
Well, I wouldn't mind starting with the home of affordances, where the term came from. And it came from the work of the ecological psychologist James Gibson back in the 1950s. And he admitted that he made the word up. It has obviously got an English language general connotation, very much like the word constraints, that has a general connotation. But affordances used in a psychological perspective, introduced into psychology, the study of human behavior by James Gibson, has a very specific meaning, which has grown a bit. So he talked about the fact that, remember, Gibson's ecological psychology tries to move the center of focus on human behavior away from internal processes and systems. So, looking for the explanation within the person for human behavior. And he said the big mistake we're making here as psychologists is that we're not including the environment. So it's pretty much the person-environment relationship. That's where we should be looking at for explaining human behavior. And he coined the term affordances to talk about the opportunities or possibilities for action that emerge as an individual engages in transactions with their environment, exchanges energy with the environment, exploits energy in the environment as information, but also imparts energy through their movements and their actions. So this is a different way of looking at human behavior rather than focusing on the internal program schema and internal mechanisms as was the case back in the 1950s.
Yeah. And what I really like about this as well is, and I think further down the line, Rob Vitagen, he really spoke about this and put it in the spotlight, if you like, is this idea of giving agency to people. So in a sport context, you're giving agency to the athletes, to the players, whatever it might be, in the sense that they can find their own way in the world. They don't need this, as you said before, this puppeteer or somebody giving them this information to get an output.
Yeah, that's quite important, that, Martin. It's a really good point, agency, because I remember back a few decades ago, Gibson and ecological psychology was accused of emanating from behaviorism. Some people argued that ecological psychology was and the person-environment relationship was very akin to the stimulus-response relationship when we're explaining human behavior from a conditioning perspective. And I think nothing could be further from the truth. And so I think it's important, Rob Vitagen and his group at the University of Groningen in Holland, they talked about the notion that affordances could be defined as invitations for action. In other words, whilst there may be affordances available in the environment, not everybody would see that affordance in the landscape, the surrounding landscape, that would see it in the same way, perceive the information and use the affordance in the same way, because of course it depends on your capacities and your capabilities. But what I like about the notion that Rob Vitag and his group argue is that, you know, there is this person-environment relationship, but you're not like a cork bobbing in the current. In other words, the environment isn't just pushing you around and you're responding to the strongest energy source in the environment in a kind of a unintelligent way. There is agency there, so an individual can their transactions with the environment can be guided by their intentions, their needs, and their capabilities.
Yeah. And Eleanor Gitzo, I'm just looking at that paper now, the 2017 one, Keith, from Rob Vittorg, and she makes a lovely quote. She puts the self in control, which I think is an important message. So I'll change it to the athlete in control or player, whatever it is. I think that's a really important message for coaches and sports scientists and teachers. Yeah.
So if we got into, like, for the practitioners, then what would be some examples of affordances that are there for us to engage with, or to invitations or opportunities to act?
Yeah.
What would the affordances be out there?
Yeah, I think they'd be very, again, going back to that Rietveld and Kiverstein paper, one of the things they mention in the affordance landscape is that the surrounding environment is a resource. So there's a resourcefulness in the surrounding environment that people need to be coached or taught or learn, probably, you know, a much better emphasis. They need to learn to engage with it and learn to use those available affordances, accept some affordances on some occasions and other affordances on other occasions. But, you know, for example, just take the climber, a climber on a vertical surface, being able to perceive information, what a small crack or a hole in the vertical surface means for inserting the whole hand, or can they fit just 3 fingers? And you know, Dominic Orth's work on climbing has looked at the affordance selection, the 3-finger grip, a 2-finger grip, and a 1-finger grip, etc. So there are affordances available, providing information to a climber, but really only a climber with those capabilities and capacities will use those affordances in a particular way. So they must not be seen, a 3-finger grip, 2-finger grip, or whole hand grip must not be seen as a technique that all climbers should aspire to. You know, it may be that some people can climb even though they may have some fingers missing. You know, they may be able to adapt the way that they interact with the environment. So they're just opportunities or invitations for someone to engage with the environment, and they can do it in different ways.
I think that's a great point, Keith. They're a resource that can be used. They also, Rietveld and Kiverstein also talk about the relational nature of affordances, and that therefore the word they use is ecological physics rather than physical physics. So we see the world in terms of what it offers us in terms of our capabilities. So I always use a silly example to explain, you know, a hill. What does a mountain offer us? Well, it depends on what what our action capabilities are. If it's a giant, it affords stepping over in one go. If we're human, normal height, it's a 2-hour climb.
Yeah.
You know, with ropes and tools and everything as well.
Yeah.
Your point about the climbing one's a really good one, because I can remember when I was at uni in Leeds, seriously a long time ago, I was stuck on this rock. Like,
oh,
just
you
in
told me this story. This is a good story. Yeah.
Stuck in the X position, you know, like making sure I'm not falling off, but had frozen. And they're going, I can't move. No, I can't move. Yeah, you can. There's a hold there for you. No, I can't see any hold. There's no hold there. They're going, yeah, there it is. And it was literally a piece of rock like that. And they say, you just put 2 fingers in there and pull yourself up. This is a novice climber. And I'm going, you are having a laugh. I put it quite so politely. But so it's a really interesting idea that the resource is there, but you've got to be, well, there's two things I want to sort of talk about. Is one, you've got to be able to the capability to take that afford and have the ability to take that. I didn't even know that was a possibility, that I was pulling up 90 kilos at that time or whatever, on two fingers. So I didn't see it. So the other thing we say we can, these affordances are available if we've got the effectivities, is being able to see it in the first place, one of those effectivities. Or is that, how do we learn to pick up an
Yeah,
affordance?
through our transactions, and this is why parents, teachers, coaches, siblings have got to allow people to explore the environment. So your point, Ian, about the novice climber in the exposition, the elite climber who may be sort of sideways on, as Ludovic Sefer, he talks about the sort of swinging door position with the legs just sort of swinging around, etc., on the vertical surface. It's not on your landscape, I'd imagine. It's not on mine anyway. But these sorts of things, you build them up slowly. You engage directly, gaining experiences with the environment, and this is why play is so important to young children. Exposing them to lots of general physical activity and general play and sport experiences, learning to move. Rather than going straight into, well, we've identified you as a potential footballer at the age of 4, and we're going to now train as a footballer, that's it. All that general movement and play is so important, because that's where you learn how to perceive information, use information to regulate your actions, use affordances in very simple, basic terms. So it might be, is this, for a young child, is this step upable? Have they got that sort of scaling of their limbs, etc., or do they have to get on all fours and climb up, crawl up rather, sorry, this surface and that sort of thing. And incidentally, there's some great work on, as people age or they become less fit, that actually shapes the way they perceive affordances. So a vertical surface for, say, walking or running, for someone at the age of 20, 25, that same person aging a few years later may look at that vertical surface and feel a bit daunted, because they're sort of, the way that they interact with the world has changed, and that has altered, and that shapes how you perceive an opportunity for action in the environment, and you may turn it down. So it goes back to the invitation thing. You may say, that's too steep for me, or something like that.
Lovely idea. Okay. That lovely idea about affordances are body scaled. So I think it was Warren who did the stair height rise, about whether the stair is walk upable or whether you've got to clamber up using your hands as well. But the second point that you made there is it's also action scaled. So as you get older, you maybe lose leg strength, become more infirm. That a step that you could walk up before might not become step upable as well, or a bit like getting out of the chair as an older person, isn't it?
Yes.
You've got to have the height of the chair needs to be higher so you can get out of that chair. If we have, if they can't get out, then we're going to reduce activity, etc., etc. So, and I think that's important for all levels, isn't it? But also important for junior sport in particular, in terms of action scaling sports to make them more representative of the games that you're going to be playing as an adult.
That's a great point, Ian. And maybe it's worth expanding on that, just in terms of applications for practice. And although I know maybe the more socio-cultural practices that influences affordance in terms of a sports system, i.e., at 11s you play 11-a-side or full-size cricket or whatever it is, might be a bit more tricky to navigate. I do think that's important for coaches to consider that in their practice. What can this scale? I remember when I was growing up playing rugby, a size 5 rugby ball was too big for a lot of the players in, what would that have been, 15, 16. It was still too big, and you were very limited with how you could pass it. But with a size 4, you could spin it some real distance. and you're still having that opportunity to perceive and act. And yeah,
I'll give you a couple of examples of that. One from the
brilliant.
research Adam Gorman led, looking at basketball sizes, and what we were looking to do was create a ratio of the circumference of the ball to the hand size. So we
Mm.
got a value for adults hand size, and we wanted to match the 12-year-olds to match the same ratio.
To
And we
scale it.
found to scale it so that it fitted in the hand in the same way, that they could do the same things with it.
Mm.
And they found that they were using a ball size that was at least one or two sizes too big for them. And then
Mm.
when we got them playing a little game, as Johnny Hedrick and Adam did all the sort of data collection, got them playing a game, and with the full size ball, there wasn't one 3-point attempt in the whole game. There weren't any scores, but there weren't even any attempts at it. And
Mm.
then when they then used the smaller ball, I think it was a size 4, if I remember correctly, 3-point attempts started to emerge. And a reviewer, I remember saying, "Well, that's not a great finding. It's not a big finding." I'm going, "It's massive because it will change the way that you need to defend.
Yeah.
Because if I can score from this, you've now got to come out and defend it. So
Mm.
that creates space inside, which allows you to then do cuts and get in and do et cetera, et cetera. And
Mm-hmm.
so this change of the constraint, or change of the scaling, the affordance in terms of what the ball offered,
Mm.
was really significant, I think,
Yeah.
in shaping the game.
Yeah. I think, for example, sometimes you know, you're going for a walk, you're going for a run near playing fields, etc., and you hear a coach talking, shouting to the kids, young kids swarming around the ball, and the coach is saying, spread out, as if the kids haven't thought about that and go, oh yeah, we should all spread out. But really, it's not understanding the game from their perspective, which was pretty much about the child who's hasn't got the leg strength to kick the ball very far. They have to get close to the ball in order to dribble, and then the range of passing is shorter. So that's why the swarming effect occurs. It's not because the kids love being near each other and can't bear to be apart from each other, or don't understand the coach's instructions spread out. It's because literally there's this relationship between their current physical status, their physiological status, their strength, etc., and their ability to carry out a pass over a medium distance. That's when they start to spread out.
I think it's a really important important point, Keith, that a lot of people say, "Oh, the kids don't have any spatial awareness." It's nothing to do with that. You're absolutely right. I want to get on the ball. I know my teammate can't kick it to me that far. I'm coming close to get the ball. The defender knows they can't do it. They're coming close. I'll give you an example where I saw this in adults play, because I was doing a level 2 or level 1 course for netball in Brisbane at one time, and I got them playing a little 4v4 end ball game, and I got them to do it with a netball, with a basketball, and a volleyball. And when I used the basketball, a beehive appeared because they couldn't throw it far enough, so they all got caught. And
Yeah.
then netball they were fine, and then the volleyball. I asked them at the end, which one would you prefer to have played with? And they all went volleyball. I said, well, why? What's the reason? Oh, because you can do more with it. We can be further apart. We can create space. And I thought that was a remarkable, to see it at adult level. I wouldn't have particularly expected it. I thought they would have been strong enough to make reasonable passes with the
Just
basket.
I think this is brilliant. I'm thinking on the fly here. I'm just thinking to make things even more relevant. I'm just looking at the list of patrons. So we've got Sean, I think, works in volleyball. Marco is jiu-jitsu, I think. Jordan's football.
Yeah.
Um,
So
Kyle's football, yeah. Regan, I think, is MMA. Rob is basketball. So maybe one of the things we could consider is size. So I was thinking, your point about scaling with equipment in, but also pitch sizes. So really important. So I'm just thinking when I'm coaching rugby league, it can be like an extra meter can make such a difference in the
Ah,
behaviour of the players
massive.
in
Yeah.
terms of pitch width.
Mm.
Yeah.
So maybe thinking, how does
Well,
distance and size influence how
so
the
one of the things we talk about is, can we model the adult game and then scale it in terms of the action capabilities of the
yeah,
kids, so
Yes.
we get the same game. So
Yes.
in AFL, I think it takes 4 kicks or 3 kick. I can't remember exactly. It's 3 or 4 kicks to get from one goal to the other.
Yeah.
If we wanted the kids to game to look the same and be strategically the same, we need
Yeah.
to scale it so it's 3 kicks long or 4 kicks
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
In netball, we had a little study where obviously in netball, the only reason they can't throw it in one from one end to the other is because you've got to go through the thirds.
Mm.
So it's passes. But we looked at 12-year-old girls and saw how far they could pass it. And it
Mm.
was 5 passes on a full-size netball court. So
Mm.
therefore, you're getting a completely different game.
yeah,
For
Mm.
cricket, we looked at how far could you hit it, how far could you throw it, and create a game where they had to defend boundaries, because
Mm.
otherwise you get a cricketing version, cricket beehive, which we talked about on the
yeah,
podcast with
Mm.
Alex last game. I mean, I
Mm.
think in terms of things like on a judo mat, what's the size of the mat in relation to the child?
Mm.
So if you mat's huge, you've got these two little figures in the middle, like you
Mm.
can run away further, or like it's just going to create. It's a bit like having a boxing ring, where
Mm.
you can have a huge ring, small ring. It's going to create. It's going to change the interpersonal distance
Yeah.
between the
Yeah.
two fighters, and therefore going to change their behaviors as well. So
Yeah.
think think those sort of afford. The other thing on that, of course, is an affordance. The scoreboard is an affordance,
Yeah.
which was Mike Maloney's work, which showed that in Taekwondo, they fought differently when there was a scoreboard there than when there wasn't a scoreboard there. They didn't know whether they were winning or losing if there was
Mm.
no scoreboard.
Mm.
So they fought completely differently in that respect
yeah.
as well. So,
So
So, sorry, just on that, sorry, Keith, I think that's really important. So even if you're working with a team, so let's say a football team where they are playing 11 aside, but you as a coach notice or you can perceive that these young players can't engage in that game effectively, surely because of the size of the pitch, the ball,
yeah.
whatever, the
Yeah.
number of players. It doesn't mean you have to replicate that in practice. So we can be quite sophisticated in thinking, right, how can I redesign practice that, okay, it
Yeah.
might not look like 11 aside.
Yeah.
However, it's better developing the players. So in 3, 4 years' time, they can
Mm.
more effectively engage with that game. I think that's
Terrific point.
yeah,
Yeah. I think the chief criticism there is coaches stop treating children um, as mini adults. That they've got their own needs, they've got their own capacities and dispositions and tendencies at different ages. We're all changing. We're all changing all the time. And I'm talking about sort of through childhood, adolescence into young adulthood, and then even to later years as well. And all the changes that go on can shape continually. They're shaping the way that you interact with the environment, i.e., the affordances that you can use and those that you can use. So sometimes some affordances that you used to be able to use as you get older, perhaps through lack of use, you may use other affordances instead, rely on other affordances. And that's something you've got to be thinking about. So there is also a health dimension to this as well. So we're talking about elite sport performance and developing performers in different sports, but from an everyday life perspective, the affordance of standing from a sitting position in a chair, if we stop using that affordance, that opportunity to stand up and move, then gradually the system, our bodies will learn not to adopt those affordances, and the affordance would be just of sitting down and engaging in sedentary activities instead. And that can be a bit of a slippery slope downwards. Having confidence and going somewhere safe to cycle on a bike, to maintaining balance, perceiving information All very simple things which can be taken for granted through aging as our perceptual systems age and change, maybe deteriorate, proprioception, our sense of touch and feel, the haptic information we get from our hands on the handlebars, the tread of the tire and interacting with the road. All of this, you've got to keep working with those things and using those affordances. And that affordance effectivity relationship, it's changing all the time. It's being perturbed by things like health, by aging, and people have got to keep using them as they get older. And of course, it's the same, but in a really hyper type of approach in a sports setting. So there's lots of different messages there.
I think it's a really important point, Keith, about the landscape of affordances that are available shape your, over a period of time, shape your action capabilities. So you might have some capabilities now, but by constant exposure to particular affordances in environment, you develop a way of doing, or the way of acting. And that comes back to play again in a lot of the time, that in terms of the way that you act. But I think other people are also affordances, and important affordance for as well. So that is the implication of the coach. The coach's the culture or the approach that the coach creates offers the player or the athlete an opportunity to develop particular effectivities, but is dependent on their view of what coaching is, I guess.
Yes.
And in the environments that they design from that. So I think lead you in.
So just on that, so one of the I'm just thinking back to the PhD. One of the studies we did, an ethnographic study in a rugby league club, and one of the he's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened then. Sorry, don't know what happened.
Right.
Yeah. So they had this this philosophy, oh, we want better decision makers and all this type of thing, more flair in the way they played. So they used to set the pitch up really wide to encourage, spreading the ball, getting on the outside, really sort of an attacking minded approach. But the behaviours of so thinking about the form of life and the socio-cultural practices, the behaviours of the coaches, they were very risk adverse. They would tell the kids off if they made a mistake or dropped the ball. So even though they had these wide pitches and the game was about playing wide, going expansive, the kids were afraid to play that way because of fear of being told off. Because, sorry, just for context, it was a performance environment. It was an academy, so the kids are always trying to move up and get to the first team. So that that does happen in we do our behaviours and the way we think about we want the kids to play. Does it align to the things that we're trying to develop? It's a really important point to consider.
James, it reminds me of James Gibson's. So go back to James Gibson's definition of affordance. Remember, he invented the term. He basically pointed out that behavior affords behavior. So the behavior of a coach or a parent or teacher towards a learner will afford certain behaviors, either to emerge or disappear. So I think, Martin, that point that you're making there, pretty much there's a strong message there for coaches, teachers, parents, facilitating children to explore, to adapt, clearly looking at the health and safety dimension as well. That's their role, ring fencing around the behaviors that the children can explore at a particular moment in their time, but not to inhibit it simply because they want to instruct children on using certain techniques in an arbitrary way.
Yeah, I really like the idea that children are born as active perceivers, another Gibsonian terms, isn't it? They're trying to find out as much about their world as they can, and they're encouraged to do that, and they're not told off for doing things unless they touch the stove or whatever. But over time, I think this active perceiver, that exploration, is knocked out of people.
Yeah,
by
definitely.
the education system.
Yeah.
And we're actually, a lot of the time, we're developing passive receivers of information.
Yes.
We're stopping them. So when we sit in a, when we do a lecture where we stand up at the front and we give information out to people,
Mm.
we've all been there, and they're nodding off, they're on the phones or whatever, but they're just waiting to be filled with information,
Yeah.
rather than, an old-fashioned way of learning is to go out and do it and explore and find out. And I really like that idea of sort of being a peripheral explorer almost. So
Mm.
if you're going out with a hunt, I think it's maybe the Ingold or something like that. You
Yeah.
go out with an expert hunter,
Yeah.
but you're on the periphery, and then they teach you little bits here and there. You start to pick up information by doing, and
Yeah.
eventually over time you become more central and you take over that role. If you
Exactly.
think about it in terms of coaching, how do we develop coaches? Well, we sit in a room and we give them information, or should we get out there and coach?
Mm.
And find really good, good coaches who can mentor and bring you in and just like, right, you take this little bit or whatever. So I think that, like that learning by picking up affordances, seeing what the world offers you, is a really key part of what I think our approach is really all about.
Yeah,
Based
I
on
think those ideas have been picked up by Matt Wood in coach education, the work of Matt Wood, Carl Woods in skill acquisition, skill adaptation, and education, and Alex Lascu, of course, as well. You mentioned Alex's name a few times. Essentially, the idea they lean on Tim Ingold's ideas of a mentor, a guide, an educator, or a coach as leading others out, leading out. So you're a kind of a guide, a mentor, but you're there to facilitate their exploration, their discovery of knowledge and information that can help them to become better at whatever they're trying to become better at, whether it's hunting or whether it's becoming a better teacher or a coach. And the process of attentive dwelling in the environment, Tim Ingold mentioned that as well, attentively focusing intentionally on certain aspects, certain sources of information. So remember, going back to the beginning, when we talked about Rietveld and Kiverstein saying that the environment is resourceful. It should be seen as resources, including the built environment they mentioned, that can be explored for information, for affordances to use. So essentially, attentive dwelling in that environment, learning to do that is a great way of learning how to engage in transactions. So these theories that you mentioned, Ian, that Rietveld and Kiverstein acknowledged and focused our attention on the fact that ecological psychology is a relational approach. So this concept of affordance is part of a relational approach, which emphasizes the transactions of an individual with the environment. That doesn't mean, as you said, passive receivers of information from the environment. Like, act like a bottle and you'll be filled up with information from that. It's not that at all. A transactionalist approach is one where the individual has agency, Martin. They can essentially make decisions about deciding where they're going to apply their energy and resourcefulness in learning about the environment, engaging with the environment. And of course, the environment then has energy which they can explore and use in whatever endeavor it is they're doing. So this sort of interactive or transactional relationship between learner and environment, that's quite important for a parent, a coach, or teacher to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, because responding to the invitations, it's like it is our primary response as human beings, isn't it? It's, if you trace way back, that was our primary response, whether it was hunting, hiding from tigers or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So, why should it be any different in sport? Well, probably because somebody's trying to control something because they want a certain outcome and
Yeah. Yes.
they don't see the value of the individual. Yeah.
A couple of points I want to make on that as well is Gibson talks about affordances are for good or ill.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we don't have to take the affordance. it might be an opponent is luring us in.
Mm. Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's setting
inviting us,
traps, literally
setting a
setting
trap.
traps. Yeah,
Boxing, we
Um,
talk about that in boxing a lot.
yeah.
right.
Cricket, Ian, you might have a
Yeah.
series of balls bowled at one side
Yeah.
of a batsman that lulls them into thinking the next
Yeah.
one's coming on that side. Bang, it goes the other side.
Might leave a big space to invite you to go and hit in there, but
Mm,
to actually hit them, particularly extra cover through a ball that's swinging, you
mm,
are invitation. That's 3 runs, schnick, game
mhm.
over. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we've got to learn to pick up which is the most important affordance at any one moment in time, haven't we? And
yeah.
has a value on it. Which of all these landscape of different affordances that are available at this moment in time should
Mm,
we really be picking up? How does this enable me to meet my goals? It motivates me to pick that right thing up. So
mm,
that's that selective attention, isn't it? Or
yeah,
selectivity of affordances, the
yeah. That's
skill.
a really good point because that's reminded me that James Gibson saw the merit of affordances because they give you value and meaning in the
Yes.
environment. So engaging with an affordance or affordance landscape is how you um, establish value and meaning in your environment through your interactions, through your transactions. It's not like a shiny object saying, "Pick me. This is the way to success" out there. It's it could be a trap, or it could be a real opportunity, or it could be something that you've got to avoid. I remember Eric Breimer, a great colleague of ours who works in the outdoor adventures. In fact, he was on a podcast, Martin, recently, so that may or may not have appeared by the time this episode appears. And Eric talks about the good or ill of affordances. So when you are walking along the edge of a cliff, you've got a wonderful view, a beautiful setting, very refreshing, vibrant. But there's also the danger of falling over the edge of the cliff, and you've got to be able to have the capacities to walk without getting blown over the edge, but also and safe. Yeah, the place is safe to walk without stumbling and falling over. So yeah, good or ill. That's a really good point.
I think that made me think of a very embarrassing moment that I might mention in a moment. But in terms of learning what a piece of equipment offers you or a tool.
Mm,
So for Phil, it would be the fence, the sword, the saber, or whatever. What
mm,
does this offer me? How does it feel in my hand? How does it go? And I
mm.
think like it's a piece of equipment until I put it in my hand, and then Gibson says it becomes part of you.
Yes,
So
yes,
it's a bit like the blind person with a stick, they see the world through the end of the stick. It's
yes.
what you.
They perceive
And
the world there.
something like a golf club or a particular type of clothing in a fighting sport.
Mm,
What does this tunic offer me? What does the looseness or whatever?
mm,
These are all opportunities that are offered for you, aren't they? That we need to become attuned to as well and learn to exploit. So first of all, there's that idea of education of attention, and then there's the calibration of your movements where you can exploit those affordances, isn't it? First of
mm,
all, it's learning to pick them up, and then can I exploit them? That might be an opponent. It might be a formation of an opponent. It might be a particular player who's out of position.
mm.
I remember who the centre forward. Was it Thierry? No, Archibald. I think he was.
Steve Archibald, yeah.
Steve Archibald playing for.
Bloody hell, Ian.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm
Different century.
going back centuries here. But he said, of course, I played on their weakest defender.
Mm.
He'd
Yeah.
exploit the defender, but he'd lull them into a false sense of security and thinking, this guy can't do this, and then bang, he's gone. So I think that's really important as well.
I think that could be a key takeaway here actually is so if the way you think about practice design for the coaches is this idea of perceiving then exploiting, so that gives you a framework of how you design your session. So what do you need to work with the players or athletes to do they need to attune to? How is
Mm,
your practicing affording that opportunity or creating the need to attune to that?
mm,
And then it's working on then the capacities to actually go and execute it. So I think that's a lovely little framework in for how we might think about practice design.
Yeah, and I think as well that leads us to this relationship between what I've mentioned a couple of times about general movement skills, working on people becoming good perceivers, good movers in the environment, using play, playing and performing in other sports, engaging in other physical activities, rather than specializing children too early in one particular way of interacting with the environment. So essentially a mix of general activities that encourages skills and relevant capacities and dispositions and tendencies that you can then take to a specific sport, helping you to become a better specialist at that particular sport. You've got to get that balance right, particularly when you're working with kids.
Yeah, I mean, as an example from when I went out to India, Keith, to Raoul Dravid's academy, and he took us to a game, an under-19 game that was played on basically no grass. It was all sand, and it was rock hard sands. And he's going, nobody's diving. Nobody's diving. You can see when a lot of our kids are not very agile in the field. They're not used to diving around. Where like we grew up on muddy fields, playing in goal with your mum's mittens on and diving around on soft ground. Or here, the kids play classic catches by diving in the pool or whatever. So this important way of agility, and I think for me, like gymnastics is a fundamental part of long-term development, if you want to call it like that. How we learn to
gymnastics,
all of that sort of thing. And I think, it really worries me in schools here, they don't have gymnastics in schools. And PE, and it's obviously it's a fear factor, or it's not interesting enough. I know from teaching it is that boys particularly weren't fast, particularly keen on gymnastics. But I think at a younger age, and if you do it in the right way, really important part of being a good performer in anything later on. It's the foundation.
I think that's the key to it is how it's taught, because I remember that the late Jim Dennison wrote a paper about training for running, and really was sort of criticizing the traditional approach, which was focusing on number of reps and the number of times and things like that, and trying to transmit that sort of very working type of practice, like very work-oriented approach to training. Only the most committed are going to stick with that. Trying to get a young child to become a better athlete, distance runner or whatever, using those methods is no good. I remember watching a session one time, and the teacher said to me, I see the kids are not interested here, and it's just trying to reduce their 2-kilometer run. It was part of a sort of a army service training preparation for kids, and they really weren't that interested. I said, well, why don't you start, this child about 20 or 30 meters in front of that child, similar abilities. And then you basically got like the fox and hounds approach, where child A is chasing child B. Child B got to make sure that they complete that distance before they're caught up by the chaser. Immediately, the motivation level suddenly changes, because it's a game. It's playing, and then you can rotate the roles of chasing and that sort of thing. So there's loads of different ways that coaches and teachers could bring in game-like approaches and play principles to make these practice activities much more palatable.
I think we're about there. Is that good? So I think there's loads of takeaways there. Yeah. For the coaches, definitely.
So I think maybe we could finish with one key point that we want to elucidate on affordances. Do you think that would be a good idea? I mean, I could start now. Rob Vitagen and colleagues talked about the importance of designing. So you talk about designing an affordance landscape, and Rob Vitagen and colleagues say it's important to design neutral affordance landscapes. And the term neutral is a little bit, it's used in a very conceptual way there. And what they meant is that it should be more open, the affordance landscape. So the the learner is doing the heavy lifting in terms of perceiving information, making decisions, deciding which affordances to use. So all the kind of affordance landscape is quite neutral from the coach's perspective. They've not said to the learner, focus on this affordance or that affordance. They kind of let them explore and discover. I think there are times when a coach can focus attention. You remember the concept of attentive dwelling that Tim Ingold was talking about? So the child could be engaged in attentive dwelling in a certain field, i.e. one area of the affordance landscape, but that's not the same as telling them, you must use affordance A or you must use affordance B, but it's about maybe limiting the affordance landscape that they're searching for when it comes to discovering solutions, movement solutions.
Yeah. I'll go next.
I'll go on then.
No, I was messing about. I'm waiting for you to talk, and then I was.
Pinch mine. I'll shout.
I'm going to follow on from Keith, though. Well, unless you steal my idea, but go on. No, go on, Ian. I'm being naughty.
No. After you.
Are you sure? So, following on from that, I think a very practical way of doing what Keith suggested is maybe as coaches we could think, what things in competition or the game can the players, the athletes, not solve yet? Like, so what's this rate limiter in their performance? It might be different for different players. And once we understand that, it's then how can we take that and then create the need for players to explore this this thing that's limiting their performance in practice. So we can take that, design it, and then maybe our coaching interactions, the way we come up with the different constraints, are really attuning the players, the athletes, to these areas of the game or these areas of the competition. And I think that's where then the skill or the craft of coaching and noticing what's going on in practice, and tweaking and dialing up, dialing down. That's the real skill of the coach then, rather than this. You're not adopting this, sending loads of information their way. It's this interaction between the context, the coach, and the athlete.
Yeah, using the environment as a resource, as Rietveld and Kiverstein mentioned. I like that idea. I like that a lot. Yeah.
So I want to talk about one thing, but I'm going to push this back at you, Martin, now for that. There is when people talk about an affordance being specific to an individual, it's only affordance if you have the action capability to take it. But there is also a normative expectation in a level or in a niche of a performance that you should be able to take this particular affordance at this level. So I think that's it, and it links back to something that you put me onto, really, around the landscape of affordances versus a field of affordances. So could you briefly just tell us what the difference is? Because I think some people wouldn't necessarily, and I certainly didn't, notice the difference between those two things to start with.
Yeah. Is that to me?
I'm sorry, I've just put you on the spot, but I know you know.
That's right. So I think, well, it's a good point, and I think they are very relevant, these ideas for coaching. Well, in my mind, anyway. So they are phenomenological terms. I think that's important to note. So this comes from like a philosophical type writing, but I do think they're very relevant. So, for example, like a landscape of affordances. So let's say I'm a fullback in rugby. The landscape of affordances is what I can see, all these rich opportunities. So if I receive a high ball, I might have an opportunity, depending on my capacities, I might be able to run, because if I'm really fast, or if I'm good at stepping, I might look to go into heavy traffic, as you'd call it, and try and maneuver. Or it might afford me the opportunity to kick and get the ball out of the 20-metre or the 22 in rugby union. So now, as a coach, let's say I've noticed something. We're playing a team, and I've noticed that they're quite poor at chasing on one side. So my practice over the next 2 weeks might really focus in on that area. So the fullback, now I want you to try and exploit the left side when they chase, because we've noticed that two of the players are quite lazy or poor at chasing. So it affords us opportunities to attack down that side. So in practice, I want to shift this landscape of affordances, or shift the players thinking about the landscape, all these different opportunities, to a field of affordances, which would be attacking these two lazy chasers. So that would be a field of affordances that I want these players to tune into, and my practice design would focus in on that. So I could try and replicate that in practice by constraining the defenders to invite these opportunities for the attacking team. I could do it by having one side chase really hard on purpose. So I've got no space, or there's no opportunities here, but I want the um, I want the sorry, it's me. I've got WhatsApp on my laptop. It keeps ringing. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so I want to be basically attuning the players to this small field of affordances where the opportunities are going to be in a game. Yeah,
Right. I like that example because it also emphasizes how performance analytics can be used to shape coaching and the way that the affordance landscape is perceived by players and coaches, trainers, etc. So it can be a bit evidence based rather than just a sort of a hunch or a feel that somebody may have. So I like that
yeah.
example.
So just to finish on that, when we spoke to Jim Mackay, Ian, he essentially, that's what he's doing. He's using performance analysis data, and through doing that, well, through a bit of intuition and loads of years of experience in the game, he's had this hunch that we're practicing line out, or we're practicing receiving the ball from very structured or set positions. But actually, we know that, I think it was 60% of the ball they're receiving rugby union is from unstructured play, either a messy kick or somebody's knocked it on, or whatever it
Mm,
might be. So that would be then practicing and tuning into this field of affordances that they're going to experience in the game. Yeah.
Well,
fantastic.
yeah, I think that's a really important point. So we can do that, but then we still need to invite the players to be learning to pick up the
Yeah.
affordances as they
Yeah,
emerge in the game. And
yeah,
Yeah.
that's that link between learning and performing. Like we often coaches say, well, we learn in practice and then we perform. Really, the two never separate, because if you're not
mm,
learning as you are playing the game, or
Yeah.
as you're
yes,
inspired, or you're not learning what your opponent offers you or
yes,
invites from you, then
yeah,
you're not
Yeah.
going to be very successful. So I
yeah.
think we can still
And
design that mindset into training as well.
that's a great idea. And to widen it, really, you're basically saying that learning to perceive information and utilize affordance is the fundamental basis of skill. So really focusing on the movement outcome or the action, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just a
Yeah.
superficial outside thing. When you're focusing on skill, you're looking at people and engaged in all the sort of all the elements of behavior that James Gibson talked about, which is perception, cognition, that's the thinking, the using your memory in a particular way to exploit the resources of the surrounding environment, utilizing the affordances. That is a major part of the skill. And of course, the practice designs need to facilitate that. So if you narrow it down too much, you're preventing people from learning those skills.
Yeah. Well, it was Rod Thorpe's big thing, wasn't it, Ian? That the traditional model would be, oh, you've got to learn the skills before you can play the game. And like,
Yeah.
I get it. Like, I was always not great at passing from my left to my right. No, sorry, from my right to my left.
Mm,
And it did limit sometimes when there was opportunities. But the
mm,
point is, I was in those situations and I knew what opportunity was there. It's just that I
Yeah.
needed a little bit of work honing that right to left pass. But the traditional model of skills first is, the problem is, over time you're not seeing these opportunities, and you're not,
exactly.
and the way you've probably been taught these skills or learning these skills is so devoid of context anyway that
Asymmetric learning, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
focus on the individual rather than the individual in connection with the environment. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I think a really nice thing for coaches to stop the game after in a one-on-one, in a fight, or in a small-sided team game, what's your opponent? Something like, what's your opponent offering you here? Which footed are they? Are they good on the turn? Are they? I remember playing badminton, and I used to practice a lot, play a lot against a left-hander, and then I'd go into a game and I'd be hitting it down what I thought was his backhand, and flipping out, I'm playing a right-hander here. You're not tuning in; you're just going into you think. So, I think that first few minutes of any competition is like, what can I find out about my opponent, and what do they offer you? It's an exploration, but exploration while still trying to perform as well, of course.
Well, that's why peer coaching, I think, is so important. Like, whether it's a small-sided game or whatever the cricket might be, or the, with the MMA guys, Raf and Marco, it's at the end of that practice or that sparring, it's like, whatever it is you're working on, like, well, what you help me, you feedback to me what I was working on this. Could you give me some insight? That two-way process is so important. I can't remember who it was now. It's a real famous coach. It might be rugby league. I can't remember, but he always used to thank the players and the opposite coaches. His thing was, thanks for the game today. You taught me so much about X or whatever it might be. Can we have a chat about that? And people were always like a bit standoffish at first, but it was like a thing that he used to do. And because he was like, look, that's where all our important information is there. It's in the defense or the attack. So why wouldn't I ask those questions?
Sharing knowledge.
Good. So that last finale, the final sort of make one point, this really added a rich layer to the discussion today. So thanks, chaps. That was enjoyable.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll end it there.